What words can describe the current state of our country? Some say it's division and outrage. Others might say now is more about a growing unity fueling hope for change. At the core, an issue at the emotional center of America and its history, race. This week, we're in Little Rock, Arkansas, a city that played an important part in the civil rights movement. How the changes captured here decades ago are still part of the fight to paint a clearer picture of race relations today. This is The Race. Welcome to The Race. I'm Dan Grossman. We are living in a historic time for race relations in America. George Floyd was killed May 25th. Video of his death sparked protests across the country against police brutality towards the black community. But those protests have expanded, and now people and companies are examining the roles racism play in everyday life, including their own. For Elizabeth Eckford, racism has played a part in her life for 70 years, but never more than when she walked up the steps of Central High School for the first time in 1957. For decades, Elizabeth Eckford has walked the grounds of Central High School in the shadows.
Hi, what are you planning?
I'm planting some lantana.
She'll occasionally talk with strangers, but she's always remained modest.
Thank you for bringing your talent here.
Oh, you're welcome. I enjoy it.
Modest of her role in its history.
Who are you?
I'm a local person.
Oh,
I live here.
You been to school here too?
Way
Way
back.
back when?
Well, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Long time ago.
Lots of memories, huh? A lot of things changed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Lots of things have changed.
Yeah.
To some, Elizabeth's name may not be familiar, but to many, the lasting image of her on Central's first day of desegregation in 1957 is.
I had felt so terribly alone. At one point, they said, get a rope. You know, when I was walking, let's lynch her. There was a pack of reporters and photographers in front of me walking backwards and asking me questions. I didn't say anything because I was afraid if I opened my mouth, I would cry in public.
It was a fear that consumed Elizabeth for 50 years as she silently battled the demons of PTSD.
Talking about the past is a walk through pain. It was very, very, very difficult.
The school, that picture, they would elicit panic attacks, anxiety, flashbacks, fears that only began to dissolve.
They were very patient with me.
Once Elizabeth started sharing her story with students who let her know she wasn't in this alone.
And I had to come and say thank you again and again and again. When I would cry, they waited and gave me a chance to resume. It meant that to them I was a human being. Okay.
These days, Elizabeth walks here as a different woman. Any sort of emotions or feelings?
No. Over years, there's no fear left, even in crowded hallways.
One who remains modest in her triumph and dedicated in her pursuit to help others.
I do point out that they can just reach out to support someone who's being harassed. Just treat that person in a way that you want to be treated. That can be very powerful. It was very powerful for me when it happened.
It's known as The Talk. People of color are preparing kids for potential interactions with law enforcement. Jessica Porter and our animator, Nikrif, take a look at how for some, that talk can be life-saving.
I can remember clearly the first time my parents had the talk with my brother and I. And no, we're not talking about the birds and the bees. My parents were trying to explain to their elementary-aged children that they were different, and our encounters with police could be life or death. They told us to address officers like we were taught to speak to all adults. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Don't make sudden movements. Don't put your hands in your pockets. Don't look down or grab anything without permission first. Follow their commands without question. And for reasons I would only understand when I was an adult, it was more important for my brother to do all of these things right. We were taught to know our rights, but under no circumstances should we verbally defend ourselves, no matter what is said by an officer. This conversation was sparked after an officer pulled over my father just a block from our house. He asked my father multiple times what he did for a living to afford his car. My father owned a construction company. Something similar would happen to my 2 black cousins and I years later as teenagers. The officer pulled us over as we were turning onto my street and asked what we were doing in that neighborhood. I pointed at my house and told him I lived there. Then he told us to get out of the car. At that moment, I remembered the talk and the biggest thing my parents emphasized. These encounters may not always be fair, but what is most important is to come home.
There's also a lot of work being done to change the racial climate in our country. Alexa Liacco met some tiny activists working to make a huge impact.
These kids aren't just drawing for fun. They're protesting.
We are tiny people demanding for a change. We just want to make our voices heard.
These are the faces of Tiny Activists ATL, pint-sized protesters with a big mission.
We want to see that everybody can be treated equal so everybody can make a change.
From marching in the streets to going to the polls, these future voters are informed.
What Black Lives Matter means to me is that black people can go outside and not feel bad by the way they look.
It means that all lives are equal. All people are the same.
And they want reform, especially after the death of George Floyd.
What I saw on that video was just horrible.
How did that make you feel?
Betrayed, because the police officers are supposed to protect us, not harm us.
They gather each weekend.
We're planning to go to more protests. We've already been to like 10 so far. It's actually pretty fun.
Their mission comes with a discussion about issues like voting rights and inequality.
Our goal is to get our kids educated.
This is what's important to us as a family, and this is the side that we're choosing to stand on in history. We're going to stand on the right side.
Because standing up for what you believe in has no height requirement, and wisdom doesn't always depend on how old you are.
A person any age could just like change the world.
For The Race, I'm Alexa Liacco.
Voter suppression is a major concern heading into this year's election. We're with a woman who's fighting back to make sure her vote counts, and the former white supremacist who now convinces others to change their beliefs. Next on The Race.